Let's clear the air first. The video game industry is just that, an industry. It exists to make money, provides goods and services in return for your money. I do not denounce the seeking of money, no, not in the least. I can only denounce it when it wastes our money, and even worse, our time. I thought to myself today, 3 months ago, that I recorded this about State of Decay, and how I've enjoyed the game. State of Decay came out in rough shape, sure. But over the course of 2.5 and now 3 years, steady, consistent improvements. Sometimes a step back, but the overall trajectory by slow and steady progress has been onward. That smaller team, a $50 game, managed consistent streams and patches to keep the trust between Undead Labs and its customers high. Yes, owned by Microsoft now, but still, we're talking the live service team, and the live team was perhaps 1/10 as big as what BioWare and Anthem have had to work with at their peak. With its nearly billion-dollar budget, and on the bad side of an approximate decade before the game even released, this was the formerly venerable BioWare, with their first new IP in 10 years. How could this have happened? This could and should have been as big as any event ever in the history of gaming. I mentioned State of Decay 2 because when contrasted against Anthem, I realized that myself, and perhaps gamers more generally, have come to take for granted the idea that games get fixed. While we've been collectively frustrated at the shift from launching in a finished state to launching in a prototype stage, by and large, these titles have made good on their promise when coming out of shells. Destiny, Fallout 76, and I begrudgingly admit Destiny, No Man's Sky, Final Fantasy 14, and so on. It's massively brazen to launch a AAA title as heralded as Anthem, and within its first breaths of life, pull the plug. For EA, Anthem stands as a Mars needs moms level of failure. So what the hell happened with Anthem? How do we as consumers draw a line here? We've resigned ourselves to the live service freemium model. I, for one, will rail on freemium from here to eternity for its soul-sucking nature ruining the already low-hanging fruit target of video games. Our medium can't aspire to art so long as its Piccadilly Circus bag of carnival tricks bottlenecks players to ever more in-game purchases. But if developers are artists, they're being demoted to Carney, a development time of 8+ years and an epically flawed development process as exposed by Jason Schreier of Kotaku, and how promises were broken both pre and post launch. Outside of these things, what happened afterward? That's my question. We know of the pre-release ailments plaguing the game, but what made Anthem so different than any other game plagued by the same pre-release issues that it couldn't survive the birthing process as the others have done? The story is really so pitiful and short that even EA executives can actually be defended for once. Because after millions of dollars of waste, they asked, "Where's my game?" They spent money to make money, and they were beginning to wonder when or if ever they were going to get that money back, let alone make a profit. And I'm going to tell you something that may well be unpopular, but doesn't make it any less true. Business is business. EA, in the case of Anthem, is not in the wrong. The development and post-launch of support for Anthem was so botched that we have to defend EA because the facts as we know them are mostly on their side. This is worth stating because a mob, when I was recording this video, was ready and uselessly boycott EA and really make a difference in that company's stockholder meetings. And yes, the shoe often fits for EA. They have a steady history of killing what they love. But I personally find it egregious to act as if BioWare was solely the victim in this transaction. So much evidence trickles of an unfocused, if not toxic effort, and a revolving door of employees and leadership. More concerning for BioWare, it wasn't and hasn't been the temporary help abandoning the ship. It's the steady sailors, those experienced, veteran developers that have shipped many titles and many of the hits that made BioWare saying "C'est la vie, no more." There's also been this defense of BioWare in the early going, the two-studio argument, we'll call it. The theory of there's a good BioWare and there's a bad BioWare. That ended up being only true so much as they believed in the theory themselves internally. The reality was two development teams equally capable, seeing two totally different games, and their visions clashed constantly. The vision clashed so perfectly that it's tough to say to this moment whether Anthem was better off as an epic single-player game like a mixture of Assassin's Creed and Mass Effect, which is the game that you experience when you're in the tower and you're doing dialogue trees, or whether or not BioWare Austin should have been allowed to make a Warframe Destiny hybrid, which would be the game when you're outside of the tower, or whatever they call it, Fort Tarsus. Either would have been fine, but both of them clearly could not live together. That incendiary clash was effectively the umbilical cord around baby's neck. Yes, EA has a massive KD ratio for studios they've bought and killed, making it not a stretch of the imagination to shrug and whimper, "Oh, alas, poor BioWare, the writing was already on the wall for thee." We all know that EA has a long and, well, rather sordid history of buying companies up and those companies then becoming either an empty shell of their former creative self or ceasing to exist altogether. I will say that as an aside, in a brief defense of EA, some of these companies have been able to find their way and be restructured, so to speak. Maxis has finally come along with The Sims, and you look at Respawn doing well with Titanfall, but of course they're more the exception than the rule, and often they do it outside of EA's umbrella, and let's be completely clear, EA forcing Anthem into the Frostbite engine had a major effect on the game as a whole. But again, it's not the whole story, and my question still persists. What was so wrong at BioWare that Anthem wasn't able to live to see another day like so many of these flawed live service games that come out these days? Let's go to where BioWare was bought by EA for 860 million buckaroos. Big ones. This was the purchase for BioWare, beloved maker of all things classic RPG, Neverwinter Nights, Dragon Age, Coder, Knights of the Republic, Baldur's Gate, Mass Effect, the list goes on and on. BioWare was the metric for which all other studios were compared in the role-playing space, the sterling standard that gamers bite their teeth into to see, is it the real thing?
That's a 10.
In comes this mythical company with their first new IP in a decade. But let me ask, and I want you to check your heart. After Mass Effect Andromeda, when you heard the news of a new BioWare IP, did you really think to yourself, "Oh baby, this is gonna be a winner"? No. Honestly, judging from the mixed hype online post-beta, I can't say anyone was alone in feeling that perhaps the luster of BioWare was wearing off. We all could say it was Andromeda, but if we all just looked just a little deeper, we all knew inside what none of us wanted to admit. The writing had been on the wall for some time now. I know, just like my dad sleeping on the couch when I was 6 years old and he'd been sleeping on the couch since I was born, I was willfully blind to the obvious. I personally had too many warm memories from BioWare games. I live in a rural area, so we get more than half the week off for school and sometimes the whole week off for the county fair, so the kids can show and sell their livestock. I know I spent my years as a middle schooler or in high school with either a BioWare game or a spin-off. First it was Knights of the Old Republic in my mom's 30-degree garage eating Campbell's chicken noodle soup made by my grandma Wine. I was absorbed by Terrace and the meticulous storytelling offered by Coder. Fell in love with that game, like so many. From grappling the challenge of encounters and the different outcomes, to truly caring. Feeling like Batman, what happened to the characters in the world. The lore was so rich in the Star Wars universe at the time, and explored with such maturity that it couldn't help but even grip the most ardent trekker. Next, it was Coder 2, a game I played through the spring track season, getting a few hours in every night after practice in the warm sun, chemical bath of post-workout endorphins. It felt lucky then to have even more Coder to play. Then it was my sophomore year of high school, staying up until 3 a.m. on ACT night with my grandma banging on the door, yelling at me to go to bed. I just couldn't stop playing. I laughed alone in 2 a.m. stupor at the city of elves that cheered when my charity went to fool's foolishness when I gave them half of my purse. Finally, it was Mass Effect 1 and 2 in the dizzying triumph that they are at doing for video game space opera what 2001 A Space Odyssey did to film. Both my brother and I loved that game like so many of you. Those games were truly masterpieces. Our story now turns to the acquisition of BioWare by EA, and as we reach this plot point and the turning of our story, I want to make a brief note about games dying. When a game dies, it's more than just the game that died. Developers just lost their livelihood. Worse, saw years of work turn to nothing. There is very little kindness beyond that created of our own account in this world. Nothing I say here is personal. I totally oppose and denounce any game's criticism that turns into personal attacks. I don't condone it in the least. Making video games is hard work, and it's human beings that do that work. Now our story goes back to the rose-tinted glasses of many a year ago and many a game ago. Those games were special games. Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and we all know it. They were games that when you were a tiny one and your dad was a tiny one and your granddad, before they can even imagine video games, were a thing. These were the sorts of games that they thought and we all thought would be made in the future. That's what that was. Your daddy could look at that game and say, that's the kind of thing I thought when we were playing Pong they'd have by now. 50 different endings. There's 100 subplots. There's various worlds. It was playing Star Trek, for God's sake. It was Star Trek the video game. It was Star Wars the video game, but deep with its own world. And it paid great respect with the debt to the science fiction writers and classics of that golden age from Heinlein, Philip K. Dick, Isaac Asimov, and so on. It was there. And by the time you get to Mass Effect 2, they had the combat to match the story. They had the class system. But then things changed, didn't they? BioWare got bought. The acquisition of BioWare by EA. And in came Mass Effect 3, and with it, the smoke signal on the horizon. Hey, the ignored raging wildfire was roaring in earnest. Things weren't the same. The weightiness and power of Mass Effect 2's combat resembled 2D silhouettes on paper with generic everything sci-fi. The massively ambitious Mass Effect 1 had turned into an empty stockholder Michael Bay, the video game. I remember the first time I played Mass Effect 3, and I remember the weightiness of Mass Effect 2. I remember feeling like I was on paper. The impressive storytelling in Mass Effect 1, the nearly met potential of its unexplored Milky Way, the completely realized lore. Mass Effect 3 took all of this, slapped on microtransactions, unignorable multiplayer, 3 endings, bottleneck them right into that, and cashed that big old check. We mostly ignored it. So here I sit at the death of Anthem, and I remember the difficult choices, and I remember feeling deeply connected to the characters, and I remember that the girls were sexy, and the guys, they were handsome, and it was a science fiction's version of Grey's Anatomy, for God's sake, inside Mass Effect. Oh, Captain, I seem to have dropped my laser blaster. Suddenly, Mass Effect 3, I'm like a 2D, 2.5D sprite racing on ground where my feet that do not tread do move. So what changed? Under new management reads the heading. The customers scratched their heads. How could things have changed so completely? The restaurant was so good before, the bread smoked and tasty, the delicatessen lay the meat on thick, and they didn't ever skimp on the fixins. Everybody was disappointed by Mass Effect 3 that cared about Mass Effect 1 and 2. And whether it was justifiable or not, how people reacted to the ending is beyond me. But the fact still remains, it was an okay game, but the previous 2 had been masterpieces. And it was really tough to live up to the hype, I'm sure. But at the same time, we all knew at that moment, deep down, in the bowels of our soul and our gut and our heart, it was different. Things had changed. None of us wanted to admit it, that when Mass Effect Andromeda came out, we had already known for 10 years that the best days of that franchise, and probably the best days of BioWare, were already so far beyond us that we just wanted to ignore the obvious. The love affair had evaporated. As stormy and as tempestuous and as hot as it was, it had dried up. The doctors were gone. The internal vision for what made a good game was gone. It wasn't BioWare magic and crunch and all this spin put in the game's press. BioWare was a studio that knew what they were doing, and they made damn good games. Then they weren't. We too often and so often forget that the video game industry is just so young, and that these people from the 90s and the early 2000s and such, they're not around anymore. But to have the company, to have the game change so much, so drastically, we had a second hit, didn't we? This is the one even BioWare likes to pretend didn't even happen. There was a game called Dragon Age, and it was epic. It was a Golden Age style RPG with lots of choice. Slow, methodical combat, a long, intensive story with dozens of endings, hearkening back to the glory days of Dungeons and Dragons on some buzzing CRTV. So there's Dragon Age Origins, and it's this amazing game, and then there's Dragon Age 2, after the acquisition of BioWare by EA. It's a hack and slash game. And Dragon Age 3 acted like it didn't happen at all, but it came attached with some clauses, those seemingly ever-present pernicious, I may PvE game. I'm a single-player PvE game, but I need a server to run. Well, I think you get the point, and I believe you understand. The argument of Anthem as this product of a company divided against itself on the backdrop of a COVID-infested world is just so much swindling. Anthem was in troubled waters before the idea of Anthem even existed. To produce Anthem under the banner of BioWare was in truth a lie. Anthem was so much better off if it had just been developed by a new company trying to make its own way. Instead, it had to live up to something that didn't exist anymore because the people who made those games and made that company aren't there anymore. It's BioWare in name only. Anthem was in trouble the moment that Mass Effect wasn't quite Mass Effect, and Dragon Age 2 took a great role-playing game and turned it into a hack and slash. And maybe they squeezed one last ounce of juice out of the studio with Dragon Age 3, but now we're in the cycle of the 2020s. Remaster, reboot, live service. BioWare's first new IP of the second decade in the second millennium was arguably their last. The meat of the original defense of Anthem was that there was two BioWares at odds with each other and a house divided against itself cannot stand. There was this great sacred BioWare like the last remnant of the true Christian church out there in the hills somewhere, and this last true BioWare located in Montreal attempted to make the greatest RPG ever was betrayed by that Judas BioWare Austin, the devs of Coder Online. Wanting to make it a more modern live service style title. This was all a lie, of course. There was never a super team of veterans prepared to make the greatest RPG that had ever been witnessed that would finally tell Bungie to shove it up their collective asses, to finally undermine Destiny and rewrite this story as the live service game Smitten. I know I wanted to believe it in my heart. I wanted to believe it, and I opened that wallet. And I make $200 a year, and oh man, I take those cold showers and I look into the streaming water and I think about the years spent on the platform and the deluge of people competing to have exactly the same thing I want. And I think about Anthem. It took a year of work to buy it. And I bought into it. And I said, it's going to be the game. It's going to be, and I wasn't alone. But let's extinguish that first myth, because it has to be extinguished. Yes, there was a Montreal team, and they're stuck in their ways. That's what we learned from the Kotaku article. They're stuck in their ways. They like the way things were done, the BioWare magic, they call it. And there was one great big caveat. All those super veterans of the industry, like the doctors, they've all either been long retired, died, or moved on to other projects in different studios. This Montreal studio hailed to be the old guard, but they're just as fresh, just as new as the Austin, Texas team. In that so-called BioWare magic, where you just go ahead and you stick your finger into the slot and lose your finger, but the door opens and they learn to tell a big RPG story, and then they have EA, and if the love triangle, it's a monkey, a salamander, and a squirrel, but only one of these creatures is going to get to make love before it's all over with, and somebody else is getting hurt. And EA wants a live service game to compete with Destiny at the same time. They want everyone to start using the Frostbite engine so they can get on some of that epic money Fortnite making all kinds of money machine go brrrr around this time. For those who have short-term memory loss, there was something like $500 million made on the Apple Store just today through Fortnite. But I'll tell you this, we can defend EA just a little bit more because they put their money where their mouth is. They said, hey, we bought you guys a long time ago. Use this engine, give me a great game. So what's going on here is we have our salamander in this love triangle, BioWare, Montreal, and BioWare Austin, the monkey, doing their Knights of the Old Republic thing. And you have the BioWare Austin team, the supposed bastard children of this entire operation. And what they're all about is apparently making good games. Because everyone I've heard talk about it says, hey, these guys know their stuff. Then you have EA. They keep throwing money into the open barrel of Monkey and Salamander.
You gotta give me a ride.
I'm way too big to drive to the devil's house.
Drive, Monkey, drive!
So who really got hurt? Why does EA do this thing? Well, they like to put the two studios in competition with one another. Capitalism is always the way.
Democracy is non-negotiable. Engaging Rant Chinese aggressors.
Tango down.
The only way. Democracy is non-negotiable. I don't think it's working for them. They did that with Call of Duty. That's why Call of Duty's in a bit of a rut and a mess. That's how we went from Call of Duty, the epic, story-based, paying honor and a homage to those that valiantly and gallantly served their nation when it called them, to multiplayer only. Loot box city brrr. Every poor soul that chooses video gaming digital media as their hobby, chosen against their deepest well of instinct, out of love for the medium, to continue to open that wallet and pre-order. You're the ones who lost here. It wasn't EA. It wasn't woeful BioWare, poor BioWare. It was you. You, the consumer, lost in this. I recorded this video initially while walking on a frozen February, and it took me to May to edit together the gibbering, gray water, bubbly utterances, big gaps in the recording from that night due to a frozen screen. But it was a frozen crystallized night all around me. My shoes without any tread were going flat and the rubber seal had gone cold. And BioWare would have you believe that your local piece of digital detritus, dime a dozen commodity streamer, that me, you, should feel bad for the big, mighty Goliath BioWare. EA and BioWare, they get to keep cashing in on broken promises and empty dreams. Austin keeps going on Coder. BioWare got Dragon Age, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to reboot Mass Effect and remaster Jade Empire eventually, and they'll probably never squeeze out, in my estimation, another ripe piece of IP ever again. So you just go ahead and ignore that thanks to historical revisionism, we're going to take out Miranda's booty because it treats her like a sexual object, and Shepard isn't a sexual object with his ripped bare abs, his masculine and defined jawline and voice. And Twilly and the Borean, the Quack the Borean, whatever the thing is, the bad immune system, she's not a sexual object. And everything that is bad and poisonous in this land is the act of the man. So it isn't really BioWare's fault. They sold you a bill of goods undelivered. It's all that other big stuff. That's beyond anyone's control. Sue me. We got screwed. And no Goldman Sachs LGBT banner and clan tag PLM hashtag is going to save anybody from that fact. You got hosed. You got took. Words are worth as much as the action behind them. Claim the moral high ground. Go fight on that hill and die. An awful lot of companies, including our poor victim, BioWare, ready to change their pronouns and to dance Uncle Sam so long as the man makes the money printer go brrrr. BioWare needs to face that they have a face. These faceless, nebulous corporations that always post whatever's popular to the tweens at the time on social media to generate revenue, they're only as good as their reputation and they know it, so they do the easy stuff. But as a gamer, we all know that BioWare isn't some schmuck. No, this is a company of consequence in the history of all video gaming. And seeing its good name sullied by the bastard son they feigned and attempted love and found no feeling within for BioWare Austin. My opinion and my observation, they want us to go cry and cry for them. They're okay with Pitchfork Internet boycotting EA, form a committee because it's impotent and it gets them off the hook. When, honestly, BioWare's time for self-reflection has come because as far as I'm concerned, they didn't even try. Some would say,
how dare you?
How dare you? Devs have to work so hard to make video games. You're right, they do. They have to work damn hard to make video games. But smaller teams have done more with less. There were hundreds of people and hundreds of millions of dollars squandered in this entire deal over the course of a decade. No Man's Sky found a second life under more dire and intense pressures. There's tremendous waste in big business entertainment. I think about the film 2012. That movie had something like $112 million budget. You know what we could have done with $112 million besides make that piece of shit? You know what we could have done with $500 million besides throwing a game out there just to inevitably die? But no one could help themselves. We had to be sold, us, the gaming community, yet another bridge. The trailer of trailers for Anthem revealed at E3 turns out was nothing but a masquerade held together with bubblegum and duct tape, a prayer. A staged CGI demo that they had to have some wizard game tester train himself to be playthrough as the controls and rules within were so arcane and prone to breaking at any moment, they nearly had to cancel. Resident Wizard himself, able to walk through properly, because it was playable only in the most rudimentary sense of the word. That was your game. That was the first big lie. And this game was due out in less than a year. But hey, look, listen. This was BioWare. BioWare magic and EA's money. The first new IP in 10 years. Nothing to see here. Please disperse.
Excuse me. All right, move on. Nothing to see here. Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
Then the inevitably predictable happened. Delay, and here we are, delayed indefinitely. Anthem was always worth saving because Anthem had good combat, and Anthem had interesting mechanics topped deliciously by a satisfactory combo system, all backdrop behind a cool vision of deep mythic science fiction lore. Massive beasts, flying mech suits, what wasn't to love? Conceptually, Anthem was franchise creating and defining. Mechanically as good as flying in a mech suit has ever been, Anthem at its best, ignoring the repetitive and shallow loop, was just plain fun. So, after all the player base had been through over the course of 2 years, and I'll be fair, the developers too, because I'm sure it was a wild ride, I still had hope because Anthem could become very special. And what do you know? It's coming. It's rumored. There's a leak that it's slated for relaunch on the Xbox Series X, and oh, I was excited again, just like that trailer, and the PlayStation 5 to boot. There's official documents, leaks, briefs, classified, UAPs, it's in the air, aliens, Area 51, it's happening. The team size is disclosed, but wait. That's awfully small, around 30 people for a live team and a reboot. The Christmas update goes 2 months too long. Christmas lights sit around like your awkwardly lazy neighbor who lets the Christmas lights still shine up in March but never turns them on. Then we reached the 1 year anniversary and they put out 3 new reskins and they said, hey, log in, big things are a-coming. Just be patient like you've always been, gaming community. Still, many a commentator, many a YouTuber and streamer mentioned, any player mentioned. When one looked back, how was it that a big AAA release promised to have multiple Javelin suits, a decade-long plan, and that's not an exaggeration, something that saw itself as the kryptonite to Destiny? How was it that Anthem had changed so little, made so little ground in that last year? Still, hold hope. Anthem next, Anthem 2.0. Seemed poised any day now, and it's gonna release. We're gonna have a re-release. Oh, it's gonna be like No Man's Sky over and over again, and everybody posted almost on the daily. It was a diurnal cycle, sun and moon, land and water, sea. Anthem next. It's coming. It's coming. Then they missed a blog post date, and another teased, showed us that cool little video of what's coming. It's coming. Concept art, even the systems they were programming, ooh, that was wicked. They had new mechanics like the artifact system and Javelin mastery. 2 weeks later, Anthem was dead. I wonder if any of the content previewed was even real. I think it was probably the work of any decent YouTuber who can make thumbnails. I don't think it existed. I don't think Anthem was ever poised for re-release. I think the promise was as thin as the digital type font it was written upon. If 1 year ago BioWare, Anthem, EA, whatever forces conspired, because at the fundamental level, no one is fully guilty and no one is fully innocent, would have just said, hey, it didn't make money like we want to do. It didn't make money like we want. It's not monetized like we want. We just don't see a future. That would have been fair. It would have pissed people off. There would have been videos like this galore by much larger YouTubers, but it would have been fair. Instead, it propped up this lie so that they could avoid the public abuse. They could avoid the headlines. But they needed those headlines. And they needed headlines that mentioned that Anthem was in troubled waters long before COVID. Anthem was in troubled waters the moment that EA bought BioWare. And there's no COVID to blame for something that happened a decade ago. The truth, the hard truth, the cold truth. Had Anthem maintained nothing more and nothing less than a steady release schedule, some public relations, writing steady blog post updates, quarterly patches, slow and steady, this ship could have been saved. Upon reflection of a video that took so long that no one even remembers that Anthem was canceled anymore, it reads like an after-action report. Why did the plane crash? How did so many lives go to waste? And why can't we even remember where they fell? How is this game still up? What's the point of that? That's the next question. If the question was originally, how did a AAA game that promised to be live service falter so spectacularly that they gave up a year later? The question then becomes, why after that epic disaster, that is a multitude of factors when we really get down to it, why is it still up? Why is it still online? What is there to look forward to? What is there for the player to do? Are they making some bit of money on the whales? Are they literally doing that as a legal protection? Here's my conclusion for Anthem, for at least that first question, on why and how a big, multi-million AAA game with a 10-year plan can't make it a year. The writing was on the wall. It was on the wall 10 years ago, and when it finally came time, and Anthem was Katrina. It was the levee that the Army Corps of Engineers had said, it's not gonna hold. It's not gonna hold. You're gonna have to replace it. You're gonna have to really rethink where the city of New Orleans is located and that levee. That was Anthem. And it took the right storm. It took tremendous pressure. It took all of the mistakes that the video game industry has made for so long, over-promising, under-delivering. But when it finally came time to pay the Pied Piper and make an honest accounting of how it was that the consumer was let down, their customers were let down, the check they wrote was signed with their excuse. Noted in the memo, it said, COVID. That's right. Those missed blog dates, those extremely quiet months, which turned into a year plus. This same studio was struggling to get blog posts out, let alone the updates that all other games during this time frame, like Kingdom 2 Crowns, Atomic Crop, State of Decay 2, ones I play anyway, that are smaller studios, managed to still routinely do. Even infamous Fallout 76 managed to get some of their largest and most important updates out during the same time period. And No Man's Sky managed their way when they were getting death threats. All of those games were able to continue. Video games in the modern age are slow, steady efforts. Gamers have to learn to be more patient, and we've already resigned to the fact that the game is not going to be quite ready when it comes out. And sticking with it takes persistence, but the payoff is a digital money printer. Anthem is a weird, strange piece of gaming history, which will only go down as one thing and one thing only in my estimation. The only moniker it has earned and deserves and shall be rewarded with ignominy, the greatest single failure of the 8th generation. The biggest money hole EA ever put its foot into, and the greatest, the most infamous digital bridge ever sold to an ever more jaded and cynical gaming fan base. With their cup half empty, but seeing it half full, wanting so badly for the real thing. I'll see you at twitch.tv/Pandora. Thank you for watching.